What ranking should I give this film? Highest or lowest? Let's figure it out right now. When a Titan music mogul is targeted with a ransom plot, he is jammed up in a life or death moral dilemma. That is per IMDb. Highest to Lowest is directed by the incomparable, iconic, legendary Spike Lee. And if you don't know who that is,
where have you been?
So I have so much respect for Spike Lee. I've seen the behind the scenes for Highest to Lowest. I've watched his entire masterclass. I've seen probably all of his films, many times. Obviously, he's very successful and renowned in the filmmaking world, with his largest impact coming with his influence in Black culture and being a trailblazer for Black films and filmmakers. And I'm speaking as someone who's currently trying to navigate this industry. Spike Lee's films have most definitely made a significant impact on me and my relationship with films and filmmaking. However, his direction and vision for Highest to Lowest didn't quite hit the standards of some of his previous work, in my opinion. On the technical side of things, I felt the pacing was pretty off in a lot of the scenes. Too many of them overstayed their welcome. I mean, it is based on the film High and Low, which I have seen, and it is a very simplistic plot and story. I also felt like the emotional tone in many of the scenes weren't as poignant as it seemed Spike was going for, and it also felt borderline uncomfortable at times. And I don't mean uncomfortable like we're sitting in the tension of the scene, but almost more cringe. For example, spoiler alert. There's a scene where Jeffrey Wright's character just finds out his son is the one that's been taken, and the cops that are supposed to be helping are kind of harassing him because he's an ex-con. And he keeps yelling, "Am I being detained? Am I being detained?" Until eventually they let him leave, and I got the message, but it didn't strike the emotional chord I think they were going for, and I felt kind of awkward. But not because of the scene's weight. It was almost more feeling embarrassed for the actors. But in regards to vision, it was sort of messy to me. Partially because this was based on another film that had its own vision, and since Spike hit some of the exact same marks that film did, but clearly had his own themes and messaging, it sort of felt disjointed at times. Also, as much as I admire Spike, one of my biggest criticisms is that he can be a little too heavy-handed with the themes and messaging, and it can take away from the plot and story, which then affects how much you're entertained, which then affects how much you feel or care. Man, I'm sad to say it, but I think it's a 2 of 5 for direction and vision. So I thought the cinematography was nice and classic. With all the superhero films or these big epic films that require a ton of CG and special effects, sometimes it's nice to just get a film with cinematography that's only trying to tell the story. That being said, I did think the cinematography was good. The composition was good, but the blocking and framing of a lot of the shots were a little strange, or maybe just not very compelling for my taste. I really didn't love the editing either, specifically the cutting. Some of it was just too fast, like this. So, is it a deal? Yep, good, great. I'll send the paperwork over tonight. Perfect, great. Well, maybe not that bad, but you get what I mean. And there was this weird jazzy wipe that transitioned us to another scene that felt very old school Star Wars wipe, which was interesting. Yeah, something like that. On a visual level, the film was outstanding. There were tons of New York City backdrops or beautiful New York brownstones that made me want to go back and visit New York as soon as possible. The offices that Denzel's character worked in were gorgeous. The music and record motifs all around him were a great touch. The beautiful portraits of Black singers and musicians from yesteryear, that was definitely a vibe. Spike also did the glide thing that he does in a lot of his films. He did it a few times. In this one, it was a nice homage, although I'm not sure it had the same effect it had in previous pictures. I also really enjoyed the lighting and color choices too. 3 of 5 for cinematography and visuals. Now, let me just be upfront and say, I thought the writing and storytelling may have been the weakest link in this film. This film is clearly all about its themes and messaging. It touches on class divide and inequality, power, legacy and morality, generational and cultural conflict, art versus commerce, crime, justice, and cycles of struggle. It even goes as far as just bringing awareness to ebony alerts. All of these themes and messages are admirable, and I agree with, or can at least appreciate, a lot of what Spike is trying to say. The disconnect for me, though, is primarily in the plot and story. In my opinion, there just wasn't any story for any of the characters whatsoever. We never get an earnest backstory on anyone, and we never spend any time seeing these characters have human moments that we can relate to or at least empathize with in a meaningful, maybe intimate or vulnerable way. And that's important because that makes us care. And by the end of this film, I can't say I really did. Now let's touch on plot. I think the plot in conjunction with the themes is where this film had the most issue. Since there wasn't any deep story, it falls upon the plot to keep us interested. Unfortunately, the plot is just too simplistic and familiar to carry this film. And if I now have no story to care about and a plot that's not particularly engaging, I'm not entertained and I check out a little. Also, dialogue was a little dull too. All in all, I appreciate that Spike wants to deliver a message and give everyone something to think about and maybe discuss. I actually prefer films with some sort of message, where throughout the film you experience emotional highs and lows and are compelled to use your brain or empathize with someone or something that you may not have without seeing this work. Whether it's happiness, sadness, anger, love, excitement, fear, joy, outrage, forgiveness. That's what makes film magic. 2 of 5 for writing and storytelling. Real quick, everybody, if you haven't subscribed and you're liking this video, please think about subscribing. It would mean a lot to helping the channel grow. You don't even have to leave this video. Just hit the icon on the bottom of one of these sides and you're good to go. Thank you. Back to the review. Highest to Lowest stars Denzel Washington as David King, a powerful, aging music mogul whose empire once defined Black excellence. Jeffrey Wright plays Paul Christopher, David King's longtime chauffeur, who's loyal, hardworking, and living humbly in contrast to David King's wealth. There's also A$AP Rocky as young felon, Ilfanesh Hedera as Pam King, Aubrey Joseph as Trey King, and Elijah Wright as Kyle Christopher, who is Jeffrey Wright's son in the film, but is actually Jeffrey Wright's son in real life too. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that this wasn't Denzel's best performance, but he was still pretty good. And I guess I would have to agree with that, but I would make it even more granular and say that could be due to lack of a guiding hand. And what I mean by that is it sort of feels like Spike just really trusts Denzel and Jeffrey Wright for that matter. And it seems like he told him, this is what's going on, now do your thing. And sometimes that works, but this just seems like it wasn't tightened up enough. The same sort of goes for Jeffrey Wright. I felt like he was just also doing his thing, and we'll see what we get. It wasn't bad by any stretch, but it wasn't his best performance. The rest of the cast was just okay. I liked Aubrey Joseph, but I wish Spike would have pushed him for a little more emotion. Elijah Wright too. A$AP was not great in my opinion, but you kind of expected that. In his defense, the dialogue and the story for his character didn't do him any favors. Also, all the characters as written almost felt ancillary to the message and themes, which I guess is not completely uncommon in a Spike film. 3 of 5 for performances and characters. If I'm being honest, it felt like Spike just wanted to get his themes and messages out there, but needed a plot to wrap it in. And for whatever reason, he went with the plot from the old film High and Low. And apparently it's also based on a book that I haven't read, but I have seen High and Low, and it's definitely similar to that. As far as execution, I think this film looks really nice, but I think the storytelling and delivery are a bit stale and could use some nuanced perspective in regards to the divide between hip hop cultures, old and new generations. Because of that, I also felt like the impact might be lost on both groups. At times, I found myself wondering, who is this movie for? The theater I saw this in had a lot of older folk in the crowd, and there was an artistic scene toward the end where some very curvy sisters were twerking right into the camera, and my first reaction was like, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't mad at the curvy twerk. My wife is curvy, but it was a little jarring, and my mind went directly to, I wonder what all these old heads are thinking. And if this is for the youth, the whole film seems like an old man fussing at them about why their generation sucks and his is awesome. And I actually don't think that was Spike's intent, but it did sort of come across that way. So I'm not sure it's gonna land with the young group either. If anything, the biggest impact for me was I need to take another trip to New York soon. And wherever I stay has to have a beautiful view of the city. High rise, hopefully. Other than that, I did like the musical themes, like the girl that played the guitar for Denzel's character, and the shots of him sitting in rooms with albums and art all over the walls. I did think the New York versus Boston thing was a little overkill, but whatever. Spike Lee has so many amazing films that I would rate very highly, but unfortunately, this is not one of them, in my opinion, which makes sense when you've done that much work. We've all gone to the office and had an off day. So to me, that's what this is. 2 of 5 for overall execution and impact. All in all, that gives highest to lowest a score of 12, which puts it into the ranking of matinee material, which I actually did see this at a matinee, so there you go. Don't forget to check out my movie phone videos and get a fun, different take on movie reviews, new and old. Did you see highest to lowest? What ranking would you give it? Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to see more of my EARNEST and movie phone reviews, please subscribe for much more. Thank you for watching.